I had worked for Harker Ridge Logistics for 18 years before the company ever surprised me with money. Not a small surprise either. It was a bonus worth $38,400. The number was so strange that when I first saw it on my payroll statement, I thought someone in accounting had made a mistake. I was standing in the break room at our Phoenix distribution center, staring at my phone while a vending machine hummed behind me. I read the notification twice, then a third time. Annual recognition bonus, $38,400. I checked my bank account. The deposit was real. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had spent most of my adult life at Harker Ridge and had never received anything remotely close to that amount. I was 52 years old, married, had 2 kids who were both grown, and had gotten pretty good at understanding what my employer's promises actually meant. A $500 holiday bonus meant someone wanted to look generous. A promotion without a raise meant someone wanted more work done. A company-wide email saying, "We're all family," usually meant overtime was coming. But $38,400? That was different. My supervisor, Lenora Voss, found me about 10 minutes later. She was standing outside the break room with a folder tucked under one arm. "You got the number, didn't you?" she asked. I looked at her. "Unless there's another Corwin Hale working here." She smiled. "Congratulations." I lowered my phone. "What's this for?" "Your years of service. Performance. Leadership. You know how these things work." "No, I don't." She laughed softly. "Take the money, Corwin." That's not an answer. It doesn't need to be. That was the first thing that bothered me. Not the amount. Her reaction. Lenora had been my supervisor for 6 years. She wasn't the kind of person who avoided questions. If anything, she usually gave you more information than you wanted. But that morning, she wouldn't look directly at me. I asked if everyone was getting one. She paused. "Some people." "How many?" "Not many." "Why me?" "Because you've earned it." Then she walked away. I stood there holding my phone, watching her disappear through the warehouse doors. I should have just accepted it. My wife, Mara, certainly thought I should. When I told her that evening, she nearly dropped the plate she was carrying. 38,000? For 100. She stared at me. "Corwin, that's more than some people make in a year." "I know. What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know." She sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Pay off the rest of the mortgage?" "Maybe." "Fix the roof?" "Definitely." "Take that trip you've been talking about for 10 years? I smiled. "Maybe after the roof." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Relief. Not excitement. Relief. We had spent years doing what most middle-class families do. We paid bills, helped our kids when they needed it, repaired things instead of replacing them, and postponed the fun stuff until later. That bonus changed the math. For a few weeks, I let myself believe it was simply a reward. I even started telling people that. Long service bonus, I'd say. Company recognized the old guys. People laughed. I laughed with them. Then I noticed something. There were other people who had received the money, and none of them were talking about it. The first person I noticed was a man named Darius Wren, who had worked in fleet maintenance for 23 years. Darius was the kind of employee who knew every truck in our Arizona operation by the sound of its engine. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in his pickup during lunch. I tapped on his window. He lowered it. "You got something weird on your paycheck?" He looked at me for a second. "What kind of weird?" "Big bonus." His expression changed immediately. "How big?" I told him. He stared at the steering wheel. 36,600. He nodded. "Why?" He shook his head. "Don't know." "You ask." Of course I asked. "And?" "They told me the same thing they told you." "Years of service?" "Performance. Retention." I leaned against the door. "You think that's what it is?" Darius looked at me. "No." "Why not?" "Because they gave me a retention bonus after I already told them I was planning to stay." That stopped me. "You told them." 6 months ago." "Exactly." He lowered his voice. "And Corwin?" "Yeah, I know 3 people who got the same kind of payment." "Who?" He glanced toward the warehouse. "That's the strange part." He wouldn't tell me. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing little things. A supervisor who had been with the company for 17 years suddenly received a bonus. A warehouse systems specialist who had been there 21 years received one. An accounting manager in Nevada received one. A driver who had been with the company for 19 years received one. But almost everyone who had joined within the previous 5 years received nothing. That didn't make sense for a normal retention program. If the company wanted to retain valuable employees, Why exclude the younger employees who were most likely to leave? I started paying attention. Harker Ridge had around 800 employees across several states. We handled commercial freight, warehouse storage, regional distribution, and transportation contracts for companies that most ordinary people had never heard of. The company wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. Very profitable. At least, that's what we'd always been told. The company had been privately owned for decades by a man named Everett Harker, whose father had started the business with 3 trucks and a rented warehouse outside Tucson. Everett had turned it into something much larger. He was 71 and rarely appeared at the distribution center anymore. His daughter, Celeste Harker, had become the chief executive several years earlier. People respected Celeste. Some feared her. She had a reputation for being extremely careful with money, which made the bonuses even stranger. A $38,400 payment wasn't the kind of thing Celeste Harker would approve without a very specific reason. Then, 3 months after I received the money, the company called an all-hands meeting. That morning, everyone received the same email. Mandatory attendance. Conference room. No remote access. No agenda. That was unusual enough to make the warehouse quiet. At 10 o'clock, nearly 60 employees were sitting in the conference room. Celeste walked in with 2 attorneys and the company's chief financial officer. She didn't smile. She didn't make small talk. She stood at the front of the room and said, "Harker Ridge is entering a new phase." Nobody spoke. Then she announced the restructuring. Several divisions would be consolidated. Some operations would be outsourced. Certain administrative positions would be eliminated. The room went completely silent. People looked at one another. I immediately thought about the bonus. Then Celeste said something that made my stomach tighten. "This restructuring has been under consideration for several years." Several years. I looked at Darius. He was already looking at me. Neither of us said anything. The meeting continued for almost an hour. We were told there would be severance packages. Some facilities would eventually close. Others would be sold. The company wasn't in financial trouble, Celeste insisted. In fact, she said the restructuring was necessary because Harker Ridge was stronger than it had ever been. That made even less sense. After the meeting, people crowded around supervisors with questions. I stayed in my chair. Darius sat beside me. "Several years," he whispered. "Yeah, you thinking what I'm thinking?" "I don't know." He looked at me. "The bonuses." I didn't answer, because by then, I was thinking about something else. Something much stranger. As everyone left the room, one of the attorneys stayed behind. He was a thin man with silver hair and a dark blue suit. I had never seen him before. He gathered several folders from the table. Then he looked directly at me. Not generally. Directly. "Mr. Hale?" I stood. "Yes." He walked toward me. "My name is Everett Bell." He extended his hand. I shook it. "I've been asked to speak with you privately." "About the restructuring?" "No." He looked toward the emptying hallway. "About your bonus." I felt the muscles in my shoulders tighten. "What about it?" He lowered his voice. "That payment wasn't a reward." I stared at him. "Then what was it?" He looked at me for several seconds before answering. "It was made because the company needed you to remain employed for 90 days. I almost laughed. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me a business card. On the back, someone had written an address. Then Bell said something I'll never forget. "Because after 90 days, we needed to know whether you were still the person who joined this company 18 years ago." He walked away before I could ask what that meant. I stood alone in the hallway, holding the card. And for the first time since that bonus appeared in my bank account, I wasn't wondering why the company had given me the money. I was wondering what they had been waiting for me to do. I kept Everett Bell's business card in my pocket for 4 days before I called him. Not because I wasn't curious. I was terrified of what the answer might be. There was something about the way he had spoken to me after the meeting that made the entire bonus feel different. Before that conversation, I had been treating the money like an unexpected gift. Now it felt like evidence. On the 5th morning, I called the number on the card. A receptionist answered. "Bell and Mercer." "Hi. I'm trying to reach Everett Bell. May I ask who's calling?" "Corwin Hale." There was a pause. Then her voice changed slightly. "One moment, Mr. Hale." She put me on hold. 30 seconds later, Bell answered. "I wondered when you'd call." "Then you knew I would." "I expected you to." "What did you mean?" "I think you know." "No, Mr. Bell. I really don't." He sighed. "Can you come to my office this afternoon? I work until 5. Then come at 6. I almost said no. Instead, I agreed. His office was in downtown Phoenix, in an old brick building that had been converted into professional suites. Nothing about it looked connected to Harker Ridge. There was no company logo in the lobby. No plaque. No photograph of Everett Harker. Bell was waiting for me in a small conference room. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't make small talk. He placed a thick folder on the table. "This concerns your employment history." I sat down. "Why?" "Because your employment history is unusual." "How?" He opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents I recognized immediately. My original employment application, performance reviews, old promotion letters, training certificates, even disciplinary records. There weren't many. One written warning for my third year because I had allowed a shipment to leave without a second verification. Another from almost 12 years ago for arguing with a regional manager over a safety procedure. Bell turned several pages. "You've been remarkably consistent. I've been working there for 18 years. That's not what I mean." He tapped the paperwork. "You've never taken a company vehicle home. You've never accepted vendor gifts above the permitted amount. You've never requested an unauthorized reimbursement. You've never been involved in a workplace complaint concerning dishonesty." I leaned back. "Are you investigating me?" "No." "Then what is this?" "A record." "Of what?" He closed the folder. "Of your character." I stared at him. "That's a strange thing to say to someone you barely know. I know more about you than you think." That sentence made the room feel smaller. I asked him why. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Do you remember a man named Silas Harker?" The name meant nothing to me. Should I? Probably not. Who is he? Everett Harker's older brother. I had heard there was an older brother, but I assumed he had died years ago. Bell confirmed it. Silas died in 2006. Okay. Before you joined Harker Ridge. Yes. Bell opened another folder. "This is where your story gets interesting." Inside was an old corporate document. At the top was the Harker Ridge Logistics logo from the late 1990s. I recognized the building in the photograph beneath it. The company's first major warehouse. Bell pointed to a list of names. One name was highlighted. I read it twice. My father's name. Corwin Hale. I stopped breathing for a second. What does my father have to do with this? Bell watched my reaction. "You didn't know?" "Know what?" He turned the document toward me. "Your father worked for Harker Ridge." I shook my head. "No, he didn't." "He did. My father worked construction. After leaving Harker Ridge." I stared at him. Bell continued. "He worked for the company for almost 9 years." I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. My father never mentioned this. Why would he? I don't know. Maybe because he was my father. Bell ignored the sarcasm. "Your father worked in operations during the company's expansion years. He was involved in warehouse acquisitions, transportation contracts, and internal accounting." I looked at the document again. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Silas Harker trusted him." I slowly looked up. Trusted him with what? Bell folded his hands. "An internal project." "What project?" "The company had been losing money through a series of vendor arrangements. Your father discovered that the losses weren't accidental." I felt my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" "It means someone inside the company had been manipulating contracts." "Did my father report it?" "Yes." "To Everett?" "To Silas." I sat there silently. My father had died 11 years earlier. I'd been 39. He had never once mentioned Harker Ridge after leaving. Not once. Bell opened another document. "This was your father's final internal report." I didn't touch it. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because 3 months ago, the board approved the restructuring. And, during the review, we discovered a series of archived records that had been incorrectly classified." "What records?" "Records connected to your father's investigation." I finally reached for the paper. The report was typed. There were handwritten notes in the margins. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. He had written, "If they ask me to leave, the problem isn't solved." I read the sentence twice. Bell said nothing. I turned the page. There were names, companies, contract numbers, dates. Some of the names were unfamiliar. One wasn't. Harker Ridge itself. I looked up. "What happened after this?" "Your father resigned." "Why?" "He was told his position was being eliminated." I stared at Bell. "Was it?" "No." My hands went cold. Bell continued. "He was offered severance." "Did he take it?" "No." "Why?" "He refused." That sounded exactly like my father. He had been stubborn about everything. When the roof leaked, he repaired it himself. When someone tried to overcharge him, he would spend 3 hours proving them wrong over $5. He hated being treated unfairly. Belle looked at me. Your father left without signing the separation agreement. Then what? He took another job. Construction. Eventually. I swallowed. Why did he never tell me? I don't know. I looked down at the report. There was one final handwritten note. I read it aloud. If they ever come back to this, they will need someone who knows the operation from the inside. Belle nodded. That's why you're here. I looked at him. You brought me here because of my father? Partly. And the bonus? Was approved after we found the old records. I felt anger rising. So you gave me $38,000 because you found something my father wrote 20 years ago? Not exactly. Then explain it. Belle leaned forward. The company is preparing to sell several divisions. I know. One of those divisions contains assets connected to the original investigation. What kind of assets? Contracts. With whom? We don't know yet. Then why involve me? Because we believe someone altered the records after your father left. I stared at him. Someone. Yes. Who? We don't know. I almost stood up. This is ridiculous. Belle remained calm. Do you remember the first warehouse you worked at? Of course. Do you remember the old inventory system? Yes. Do you remember the paper logs? Some of them. Your father worked with those same logs. I waited. Belle said, the current system only contains digital records from 2008 onward. So, your father left in 2005. I understood. You think the missing years matter. We know they matter. How? Belle opened a final folder. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten ledger. At the bottom of the page was my father's signature. Beside it was a number. A contract number. Belle pointed to it. This contract was never entered into the digital system. How much was it worth? At the time. Yes. He paused. Approximately $17 million. I stared at him. 17 million? That's the original value. Where is it now? That's what we're trying to determine. I pushed the folder away. Why not just hire an investigator? We did. And? They found nothing. Then what do you want from me? Belle looked directly at me. We want you to help us reconstruct what happened. I laughed. You think I can solve something my father couldn't? No. Then what? We think you may already have solved part of it without realizing it. That sentence stayed with me all the way home. I didn't tell Mara everything. I told her the company had discovered old records involving my father. That was true. I didn't tell her about the $17 million contract. I didn't tell her because I didn't understand it myself. But that night, after she went to bed, I went into the garage and opened the old plastic storage bins I'd kept for years. My father had left behind very little. A few tools. Some photographs. Tax records. Old construction manuals. A battered leather notebook I'd never bothered to read. I opened it. Most of the pages were ordinary. Measurements. Names of contractors. Phone numbers. Lists of materials. Then I reached the final 20 pages. The handwriting changed. The notes became shorter. More careful. I turned another page. There was one sentence. I recognized the name immediately. Harker Ridge. Underneath it, my father had written, if Corwin ever works there, tell him not to trust the numbers. I froze. I read it again. Then again. My father had written my name. But he had died 11 years earlier. And as far as I knew, he had never expected me to work for Harker Ridge. I turned the page. There was nothing else. Except a date. October 14th, 2005. The exact date my father had left the company. I sat on the garage floor for a long time. Then I remembered something Belle had said. The current system only contained digital records from 2008 onward. I looked at my father's notebook. And suddenly I wondered whether the missing records had ever really disappeared. Maybe someone had simply made sure nobody knew where to look. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same sentence from my father's notebook. If Corwin ever works there, tell him not to trust the numbers. The strange part wasn't that my father had written about Harker Ridge. It was that he had written about me. I had never planned to work there. When my father wrote that sentence in 2005, I was 31 years old and working for a construction supplier in Mesa. I had a completely different career. I only joined Harker Ridge 3 years later because my company lost a major contract and I needed a job. My father had already been gone for 2 years by then. If he'd somehow known I would end up there, he had never told me. The next morning, I took the notebook to work. I didn't show anyone. I kept it inside my desk drawer and spent most of the morning pretending I was doing normal work. That became difficult around 11. Darius walked into my office and closed the door behind him. You look terrible. Thanks. You sleep. Not really. He sat down. I got another call. From who? The company attorney. I looked at him. Bell? He nodded. What did he want? Same thing. Your father's records? No. He hesitated. Something about the bonus. I leaned back. What did he say? Darius rubbed his jaw. He asked whether I had ever seen a particular warehouse inventory report. What report? He didn't tell me. Then why ask you? Because apparently my name is on some old paperwork. I felt a chill. From when? Before I started. That didn't make sense. Darius had been at Harker Ridge since 2003. I remembered what Bell had told me. Your father worked for the company until 2005. I asked Darius what year his first job there was. 2003. What department? Fleet maintenance. Did you know Corwin Hale? He looked at me. Your father. I nodded. Yes. That surprised me. How? Darius smiled faintly. Everybody knew Corwin. What do you remember? He was difficult. I almost laughed. That sounds like him. Didn't care much for management. Also sounds like him. Darius leaned forward. But he was honest. The room went quiet. Why are you telling me this? Because he once told me something. What? Darius looked toward the closed door. He said if anyone ever tried to convince me that a number didn't matter, I should ask who benefited from it. I stared at him. That's exactly the kind of thing he'd say. Yeah. What else? Nothing. You're sure? Darius stood. That's the problem, Corwin. What? I don't think my memory is the only thing they've been asking about. He left before I could stop him. For the rest of the day, I couldn't concentrate. At 4:30, I called Bell. He answered immediately. I found something. I thought you might. That response irritated me. You knew about the notebook? No. Then how did you know I'd find something? Because your father was meticulous. Did he give you anything? No. Did he tell Silas Harker anything about me? Bell paused. Not directly. What does that mean? Your father mentioned you. How? He was concerned about you. I stared at my computer screen. Why? Because he believed the company might eventually come looking for people who had worked around him. People like me? Potentially. That doesn't explain anything. I know. Then explain the $17 million contract. Silence. You found that. I found the ledger. Where? In my father's notebook. Another pause. Bell's voice became more serious. Do not show that to anyone at the company. Why? Because I don't know who can be trusted. I almost laughed. You're the company attorney. Not anymore. What? I'm outside counsel. So you're not working for Harker Ridge? Not directly. Then who hired you? The board. Which board? The independent committee overseeing the restructuring. I sat back. That was the first time I realized the restructuring wasn't as straightforward as Celeste had made it sound. There is an independent committee? Yes. Why wasn't that mentioned at the meeting? Because the committee wasn't ready to be disclosed. Why? Because of the nature of the review. I rubbed my forehead. You're making this sound much bigger than it is. It is bigger than you think. Then tell me. I can't. Why? Because I don't yet know who is involved. I thought about my father's warning. Don't trust the numbers. What if the $17 million contract was real? It was. And what if someone moved the money? That's one possibility. How much are we talking about now? Bell didn't answer. Mr. Bell. He finally said, potentially hundreds of millions. I went completely still. Hundreds. Over the lifetime of the contracts. You're telling me Harker Ridge may have lost hundreds of millions? No. Then what? Someone may have redirected revenue. I didn't respond. Bell continued. We believe certain contracts were structured so that money flowed through companies that had no obvious connection to Harker Ridge. Shell companies? That's one way of describing them. I looked at my father's notebook. And my father found this? Your father found part of it. Why didn't he go public? He tried. With whom? Silas. And Silas. He believed him. Then why wasn't anything done? Bell's voice lowered. Because Silas died. The answer was simple. But something about it felt incomplete. Was his death connected? I don't know. You don't know. No. Then who does? That's what we're trying to determine. I ended the call soon after. That evening, I told Mara everything. Not every detail, but enough. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, do you trust this lawyer? I don't know. Do you trust your company? I thought about it. Not anymore. She nodded. Then don't do anything alone. I wasn't planning to. Good. I opened my father's notebook again. Mara sat beside me. We went through every page. Most were ordinary. Then we found a list of companies. Some were construction suppliers. Some were transportation firms. One name appeared 3 times. Northvale Industrial Holdings. I had never heard of it. Mara searched the name on her laptop. There's nothing current. Try older records. She did. After several minutes, she turned the screen toward me. Northvale Industrial Holdings had been dissolved in 2007. I looked at the address. It was in Scottsdale. I knew that address. Or at least I thought I did. It was the address of an office building where Harker Ridge had maintained a regional administrative office for years. I felt my stomach drop. That's not possible. Why? Because that building belonged to Harker Ridge. Mara looked at me. Are you sure? I've been there. Maybe the company rented space. Maybe. But I didn't believe it. The next morning, I arrived early. I went straight to our records department. The employee on duty was a young woman named Priya Ven. She had worked there for less than 2 years. Can you pull historical property records? She frowned. Internal records? Yes. What property? I gave her the Scottsdale address. She typed it into the system. Nothing came up. Try archived records. She did. Still nothing. There's no property under that address. I stared at her. There should be. She turned the screen toward me. The address existed. But Harker Ridge wasn't listed. Instead, the property was owned by a company called Northvale Industrial Holdings. I felt a cold sensation run through my chest. How long has that been there? Priya checked. Ownership history? Yes. She clicked through several records. Northvale bought it in 2004. I stared at the screen. My father was still working for Harker Ridge in 2004. I asked Priya to print the record. She hesitated. Is there a problem? No. She printed it. I took the page back to my office. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell Belle yet. I wanted to know what Northvale had been used for. I spent most of the morning searching old internal records. At lunch, I found something. A vendor payment. Harker Ridge had paid Northvale Industrial Holdings $1.8 million in 2005. The description said, Operational Consulting and Infrastructure Services. I searched for another payment. There was one. Then another. Then another. Over 18 months, Harker Ridge had paid Northvale more than $11 million. But there was no corresponding project. No warehouse construction. No consulting report. No equipment. Nothing. I stared at the numbers. Then I noticed something. The payment stopped in October 2005, the exact month my father left the company. I opened his notebook again. The final page contained only 3 numbers. 11.2, 17.0, 38.4. I had assumed they were meaningless. Now I wasn't so sure. 11.2 million. 17 million. 38.4 thousand. The first 2 numbers suddenly made sense. But the third one terrified me. 38.4. The exact amount of my bonus. I sat back in my chair. Someone had paid me $38,400. My father had written 38.4 in his notebook 11 years before I joined the company. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Then my office phone rang. I answered. Corwin Hale. Nobody spoke. Hello. A man's voice finally came through. Stop looking at Northvale. I froze. Who is this? You don't need to know. How did you get this number? That's not important. Who are you? The line went silent. Then the man said one final thing. Your father knew when to walk away. You should learn from him. The call ended. I sat there staring at the receiver. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might discover. I was afraid that someone already knew what I had discovered. For several minutes after the call ended, I didn't move. I kept the receiver against my ear even though the line was already dead. The strange thing was that the caller hadn't sounded angry. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't insulted me. He had sounded almost bored. Like he was giving me advice. That made it worse. I finally put the phone down and looked through the glass wall of my office. People were moving through the warehouse, as they did every afternoon. Forklifts passed between loading bays. Supervisors checked manifests. Drivers waited near the dispatch doors. Everything looked normal. But I suddenly felt like I was standing in the middle of a building full of people who knew something I didn't. I locked my office door. Then I called Belle. He answered on the second ring. What's happened? Someone called me. His voice changed. What did they say? I repeated the conversation. When I finished, Belle was silent. Mr. Bell? Did the caller identify himself? No. Did you recognize the voice? No. Did he mention anything besides your father? He told me to stop looking at Northvale. Another silence. Belle? Where are you? My office. Leave. I frowned. What? Leave the building. Why? Because if someone knows you're investigating Northvale, I don't want you staying there. You're serious. Very. I looked toward the door. Do you think someone inside the company made that call? I don't know. But you think it's possible? Yes. I grabbed my jacket. Before I left, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out my father's notebook. I slipped it into my bag. Then I walked through the warehouse without looking at anyone. Darius saw me near the exit. He came after me. Where are you going? Home. It's 3 in the afternoon. I know. He looked at my face. What happened? I hesitated. Then I told him. His expression hardened. Someone called you? Yes. What did they say? I told him. Darius didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he said, we need to talk somewhere else. We drove separately to a small diner about 15 minutes away. Darius chose a booth in the back. He waited until the waitress left before speaking. I've been thinking about something. What? The bonuses. What about them? They weren't random. I know. No, I mean I think I know who decided them. I leaned forward. Who? Everett Harker. I frowned. Celeste approved the payments. Maybe. Why do you say maybe? Because Everett still has control over certain things. He's retired. Darius shook his head. Retired isn't the same as powerless. I knew that was true. In family businesses, the founder could leave the office and still control half the decisions. Darius continued. 3 weeks before I got my bonus, Everett Harker visited the fleet department. Did you talk to him? Briefly. What did he ask? He asked whether I still remembered the old maintenance yard. The one near Buckeye? Yes. Why? He asked whether the old paper records were still stored there. I felt my pulse quicken. What did you tell him? That I didn't know. Did he say why? No. I sat back. The old maintenance yard had been closed for years. Most employees had forgotten about it. My father had worked there during his final months with the company. I asked Darius whether he still had access. Not officially. But I know someone who does. We looked at each other. I understood what he was suggesting. No. Why not? Because if someone is watching us, breaking into an old company property is probably the worst thing we could do. Darius nodded. You're right. Then he added, but we don't have to break in. He took a napkin and wrote down a name. Merritt Sloan. I recognized it. Who is she? Former records supervisor. Former. Retired 8 years ago. Where is she? New Mexico. What does she know? She was the person who moved the paper archives before the old yard closed. I stared at the name. How do you know her? She was my sister's neighbor. That was something. I called her that evening. She answered on the 4th ring. Hello. Miss Sloan. Yes. My name is Corwin Hale. There was a pause. Are you Warren Hale's son? My heart stopped. Yes. She didn't sound surprised. I wondered when someone would call. I sat down. You knew my father? I knew of him. What does that mean? He was one of the few people at Harker Ridge who understood what was happening. I looked at the notebook on the table. Do you know what Northvale was? I know what it appeared to be. And what did it actually do? She was quiet. Then she said, you should ask Everett. I already did. No. You don't understand. Everett Bell is the attorney investigating the company. I didn't mean Bell. She meant Everett Harker. I understood. Why should I ask him? Because he was there. At Northvale. At the meetings. What meetings? I can't discuss this over the phone. I felt a wave of frustration. Miss Sloan, someone called me today and told me to stop looking into Northvale. She immediately went silent. Miss Sloan. Then they know. Know what? That you're looking. I tightened my grip on the phone. What am I looking for? You need to stop asking that question. Why? Because you're asking it too early. I almost lost patience. My father died 11 years ago. I've spent the last 3 days finding out that he was involved in something worth millions of dollars. My company gave me a $38,400 bonus for reasons nobody will explain, and now someone is telling me to stop investigating. I think I've earned the right to ask a few questions. She exhaled. Your father believed the money was being moved through contracts. I know. No, you don't. What don't I know? The money wasn't the objective. I went quiet. What was? Control. Control of what? The company. That answer made no sense. Harker Ridge already controlled itself. Not back then. She continued. In the early 2000s, Everett Harker wanted to expand aggressively. His brother Silas disagreed. Silas believed the company was growing too fast. Okay, they fought over it. That doesn't explain Northvale. It does if you understand who owned Northvale. I waited. Who? I can't tell you. Why? Because I signed an agreement. 20 years ago? Some agreements don't expire just because people get old. I almost laughed. Who owns it? She hesitated. Then she said something that changed everything. Northvale was never really an outside company. What does that mean? It was created inside Harker Ridge. By whom? I'll tell you one thing. Her voice became softer. Look at the ownership documents from 2004. Why? Because one of the names you'll find there is someone who is still with Harker Ridge today. My mind immediately went through the company's senior leadership. Celeste Harker, the CFO, several board members, the legal department. I asked her which one. She refused. How am I supposed to figure that out? You were good with numbers, weren't you? My father was. You were too. Then she hung up. I called Darius. He answered immediately. What did she say? I told him everything. He was silent. Then he said, we need those ownership records. I know. I might be able to get them. How? Remember I told you I know someone with access to the old yard? Yes. He's not an employee. Who is he? His name is Calder Voss. Voss. Yeah. Any relation to Lenora? Her father. That caught my attention. Lenora Voss had been my supervisor for 6 years. The same woman who had told me to take the bonus and not ask questions. Darius continued. Calder used to maintain the old yard. Does he still have access? Probably. Why would Lenora's father have access to company records? He didn't just maintain the yard. What did he do? He was the security supervisor. I thought about that. Then something clicked. Would he have access to archive storage? Possibly. I didn't like where this was going. Does Lenora know? About what? Her father. I don't know. I ended the call. The next morning, Lenora came into my office. She closed the door behind her. You've been asking questions. I looked up. Who told you? Does it matter? Yes. She sat down. Corwin, I've known you for 6 years. I know. I've always respected you. Okay. And I don't want you getting involved in something you don't understand. I stared at her. What exactly am I involved in? She didn't answer. Is this about my father? Her eyes moved slightly. That was enough. You knew. I knew there were old issues. What issues? I wasn't there. Did you know about Northvale? She looked away. Lenora. She finally met my eyes. Yes. The room seemed to shrink. How? My father talked about it. Calder. She nodded. What did he say? That your father wasn't wrong. I couldn't speak. She continued. But he also said your father didn't understand the entire situation. What situation? She stood. I can't tell you. Why? Because I don't want to lose my job. Lenora, I just received $38,000 from this company. Someone called me. My father's records are involved. You know something. She stopped at the door. Then she said quietly, your bonus wasn't to keep you here. I stared at her. Then what was it? She opened the door. It was to make sure you couldn't say you were forced to stay. Then she walked away. I sat there for a long time. That sentence made no sense. Until I remembered Belle's words. We needed you to remain employed for 90 days. Maybe the bonus wasn't payment for staying. Maybe it was payment for something else. I opened my father's notebook again. This time, I looked at the 3 numbers. 11.2, 17.0, 38.4. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a 4th number written very lightly beneath them. 90 days. I stared at it. The bonus. The 90-day period. My father's numbers. They weren't random. Someone had planned this long before I knew it existed. And suddenly I understood the most frightening part. The company hadn't discovered me 3 months ago. They had been waiting for me for 18 years. For the next 2 days, I did something I had never done in 18 years at Harker Ridge. I started keeping records of my own workplace. Every conversation. Every email. Every unusual request. Every name that appeared in connection with the old contracts. I didn't do it because I thought I was about to uncover some enormous secret. I did it because I had finally realized that everyone around me seemed to know one piece of a story that I had somehow been excluded from. And I was tired of being the last person to understand what was happening inside the company where I had spent nearly half my life. The first thing I did was call Everett Bell. He answered immediately. I need to know why my bonus was $38,400. I told you it wasn't a reward. You told me it was connected to 90 days. Yes. What happens after 90 days? Bell didn't answer. That's what I need to know. Corwin, where are you? My office. Are you alone? Yes. Then listen carefully. His voice had changed. He sounded less like an attorney and more like someone who had been waiting for a particular moment. The 90-day period was not created for you. I frowned. What does that mean? It means the company had to wait 90 days before taking a specific action. What action? I can't tell you yet. Why not? Because the action depends on whether the records can be authenticated. What records? The ones your father left. I looked toward the door. Who knows about the notebook? Only you and me, as far as I know. Lenora knows about my father. She might. Her father worked security at the old yard. Belle was quiet. Did you know that? Yes. That answer irritated me. You seem to know everything. No. Then tell me something useful. Belle sighed. Calder Voss wasn't just security. What was he? He was responsible for physical archives. I remembered Merritt Sloan, the records supervisor. Yes. She told me to look at the 2004 ownership documents. Don't contact her again. Why? Because if she is still bound by the old agreement, you're putting her in a difficult position. She already knows. Knowing isn't the same as speaking. I sat down. Who owns Northvale? Belle didn't answer. Is it Celeste? No. The CFO? No. Everett Harker? No. Silas. Silas was dead when the company was dissolved. I thought of everyone I knew. Then who? Belle said, find the original ownership filing. Where? County records. Scottsdale. Yes. I don't have access. You don't need company access. He ended the call. I understood what he meant. That afternoon, I left work early. I went to the county records office and requested the historical ownership documents for the Scottsdale property. The clerk brought out a box. Actual paper. Old enough that the pages had begun turning yellow around the edges. I sat at a table and began reading. The first documents were ordinary. Purchase agreement. Property transfer. Tax filings. Then I found the original incorporation paperwork for Northvale Industrial Holdings. 3 names were listed. One was a man I didn't recognize. One was a law firm. The third name stopped me. Everett Harker. I stared at it. Then I looked again. Everett Harker had been one of the original directors. But Belle had told me he wasn't the owner. I kept reading. The ownership structure was complicated. Northvale was controlled by another company. That company was controlled by a trust. The trust was controlled by a private foundation. And the foundation had one managing trustee. I turned the page. The name was unfamiliar. I wrote it down. Elias Vale. I had never heard of him. But there was something strange about the filing date. October 14th, 2005. The exact date my father left Harker Ridge. I took photographs of every page. Then I noticed a second filing. This one was dated 3 days later. The managing trustee had changed. The new name was Calder Voss. I stared at it. Lenora's father. The security supervisor. The man who supposedly had nothing to do with the financial side of Harker Ridge. I sat there for several minutes trying to make sense of it. Then my phone rang. Darius. Where are you? County records. Did you find something? Calder Voss. Silence. What about him? His name is on the Northvale ownership documents. Darius swore under his breath. That's not possible. Apparently it is. Are you sure? I have the documents. Don't go back to work. Why? Because Lenora just left. What do you mean? She cleared out her office. I stood. What? Everything. Did she quit? I don't know. I called Lenora. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Then I received a text. Not from Lenora. From an unknown number. You are getting close to something you don't understand. I stared at the screen. A second message appeared. Ask why your father trusted Calder Voss. I showed Darius. He called immediately. Corwin, don't answer. I wasn't going to. Delete it. No. Why? Because I want to know who sent it. That doesn't mean you should keep engaging. I'm not engaging. Then I noticed something. The number wasn't random. It had an Arizona area code. I searched the first 6 digits. It was the same exchange used by Harker Ridge's corporate office. My stomach tightened. Someone inside the company had access to a corporate phone. I drove to the old maintenance yard. I didn't tell Belle. I didn't tell Darius. I knew it was risky, but I needed to see it for myself. The property was surrounded by a chain-link fence. The main gate was locked. But there was a smaller pedestrian entrance on the side. The lock had been replaced recently. That was strange. If the yard had been closed for years, why replace a lock? I walked around the perimeter. Behind the main warehouse was a smaller building. The windows were boarded, but one of the boards had been removed. I looked inside. Rows of metal shelving. Boxes. Paper files. My heart started beating faster. Someone was still using the building. I found a side door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open. The smell of dust and old paper filled the room. I switched on my phone flashlight. The boxes were labeled by year. 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001. Then I reached 2004. There were 6 boxes. I opened the first. Invoices. The second. Shipping records. The third. Vendor agreements. The fourth contained nothing but employee records. The fifth had accounting documents. I opened the sixth. It was almost empty. There was only one folder inside. Northvale. I picked it up. The folder was much newer than everything around it. Someone had handled it recently. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of contracts, payments, transfer documents, and one page with a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. It said, "The company is not losing money. Someone is using the company to move it." I sat down on the concrete floor. There were more pages. I read through them one by one. My father had tracked payments from Harker Ridge into Northvale, but he had also tracked money moving out of Northvale, not into someone's personal account, into another company, then another, then another. The final destination was something called the Vale Foundation. I remembered the name from the property records. Elias Vale. I kept reading. The foundation wasn't a charity in the normal sense. It was a private holding structure. And according to my father's notes, it had been established to protect certain assets from corporate disputes. I turned another page. At the bottom, my father had written, "Silas knows. Everett knows. Calder knows. But one of them believes he is protecting the company." I stared at the sentence. One of them believes he is protecting the company. That was the first clue that changed everything. Maybe my father hadn't discovered a simple scheme. Maybe there had been two sides. People moving money. And people trying to preserve it. I reached the final page. There was a list of initials. H, SH, CV, WH, and one more. CH, my initials. I felt the air leave my lungs. Why would my initials be there? I heard a sound outside. A vehicle. I immediately turned off my flashlight. The building went dark. Through a crack in the boarded window, I saw headlights stop near the entrance. Someone got out. Then another person. I couldn't see their faces. I crouched behind the shelving. The door opened. 2 people entered. Their footsteps moved slowly through the warehouse. One of them said, "The folder should be here." The other answered, "It was here last week." I recognized the voice. Lenora. I nearly stood up. Then the first person spoke. I knew that voice too. Calder Voss. Lenora's father. "I told you he would find it eventually," Calder said. Lenora replied, "He wasn't supposed to. He wasn't supposed to find anything. What are we going to do?" There was a long silence. Then Calder said something that made my blood run cold. "We have 90 days. Lenora whispered, "The 90 days are almost over." Calder answered, "Then Corwin has to make the decision before they do." I stayed completely still. I didn't understand what decision they meant. But I finally understood one thing. The bonus wasn't connected to a corporate restructuring. It wasn't even primarily about my father's old investigation. The company had given me 90 days because something was coming. And somehow, without knowing it, I had been placed in the middle of it. Then Calder said the one thing I hadn't expected. His father made the same choice. Lenora asked, "And what happened to him?" Calder didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the exact shelf where I was hiding. I held my breath. His footsteps stopped. He reached out, and his hand closed around the edge of the box directly above my head. I thought Calder Voss was going to find me. His hand was on the edge of the box above my head, and I could hear the faint scrape of cardboard against metal. I held my breath. Lenora was standing somewhere behind him. "Calder," she whispered. He stopped. "What?" "I think we should leave." "No." His hand moved again. The box shifted slightly. I was convinced the next thing I would hear would be my name. Then a vehicle passed outside the building. Its headlights swept through the cracks in the boarded windows. Calder stepped away. "You're right," he said. "We shouldn't be here." I heard the box settle back into place. The 2 of them walked toward the door. Before leaving, Lenora said something so quietly that I almost missed it. "He deserves to know." Calder answered, "Not yet." The door closed. I waited nearly 10 minutes before moving. Then I crawled out from behind the shelves. My hands were shaking. I didn't know whether it was fear or anger. Probably both. I picked up the folder and photographed every page. Then I put everything exactly where I'd found it. I didn't take a single document. That decision turned out to be one of the most important things I did. Because when I reached the parking lot, I saw something that made me realize I wasn't the only person watching. A dark SUV was parked across the street. The engine was running. I stood beside my truck pretending to search for my keys. The SUV didn't move. I got into my truck and drove away. It followed me. I took 3 unnecessary turns. It stayed behind me. I drove toward a busy shopping center and parked near the entrance. The SUV continued straight. I waited. Then I called Belle. They know. Who? Lenora and Calder. What happened? I told him everything. When I finished, he asked, "Did you take the folder?" No. Good. Why? Because if you had, you would have created a serious problem. I photographed it. That's different. I heard them talking. What did they say? I told him. Belle was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Corwin, you need to understand what your father did." I thought I did. No. He sounded tired. Your father didn't simply discover money being moved. What did he discover? He discovered that Harker Ridge had 2 financial systems. I frowned. What does that mean? One was the official company. And the other? A protected reserve. Why? Because Silas Harker believed the company was eventually going to be attacked by competitors and creditors. Attacked? Not physically. Legally. Financially. Through acquisitions and litigation. So they moved money into Northvale to protect it? Some of it. How much? Your father's records suggest more than $200 million over several years. I stared through my windshield. 200 million? Possibly more. Then why would they hide it? Because some of the money was legitimate corporate capital and some wasn't. I closed my eyes. Explain. Some contracts were structured to generate reserves outside the main company. Silas believed those reserves would protect Harker Ridge if something went wrong. And Everett? Everett believed the reserves were unnecessary. Which side was my father on? Neither. That answer surprised me. Your father believed the arrangement had gone too far. So he exposed it? He tried. And Silas. Silas wanted him to stay quiet. Why? Because by then, too many people depended on the structure. I thought about the note. One of them believes he is protecting the company. Was Silas corrupt? Belle took a long breath. I don't think that's the right question. What is? Whether the original plan was legal is less important than what happened after it. I waited. After Silas died, control of the reserve changed. To Everett? No. Then who? That's the part we still haven't proved. I thought of Calder Voss. Calder. Possibly. But why would a security supervisor control hundreds of millions? Because Calder wasn't merely security. I know. He had been Silas's personal security chief. So Silas trusted him. I remembered the ownership documents. Calder's name appeared as managing trustee 3 days after my father left. Why did Calder become trustee? I don't know. Then what was he protecting? Something your father left behind. I looked at my father's notebook. The records? Not exactly. What then? Belle hesitated. An agreement. What kind? An agreement that determines who controls the reserve if Harker Ridge is sold, divided, or transferred. I sat silently. That's what the restructuring is about. Yes. And my bonus? Belle said, your bonus was part of the mechanism. I didn't understand. How? Your father was one of the people named in an old employee protection agreement. I laughed. That can't be right. It is. My father left in 2005. Yes. I joined in 2008. Yes. So how am I named? Because the agreement didn't name you as an employee. What did it name me as? Belle paused. Beneficiary. I couldn't speak. The word seemed absurd. I wasn't related to Harker Ridge. My father wasn't an owner. He had been an employee. Beneficiary of what? The reserve. I felt dizzy. No. Corwin Dash. No. That's impossible. Listen to me. My father never owned a company. I know. He didn't have millions. I know. Then how could I be a beneficiary? Because the agreement wasn't about personal ownership. Then what was it? Belle finally explained. Silas Harker had created a protection agreement after my father's investigation. The agreement stated that if the reserve was ever liquidated or transferred without resolving the original accounting dispute, certain former employees and their designated beneficiaries would receive compensation. My father was one of those employees. But there was a condition. He had to remain silent about the reserve until the company either resolved the matter voluntarily or triggered the agreement. He never received the compensation. Because he never activated the agreement. I remembered what my father had written. If they ask me to leave, the problem isn't solved. He had known. He had walked away without signing the separation agreement because he refused to accept their conditions. But he also hadn't gone public. Why? That was the question I couldn't answer. I asked Belle. Why didn't my father activate the agreement? I don't know. He had the right. Apparently. Then why? That's what we're trying to find out. I suddenly remembered the note from the old folder. Your father made the same choice. What choice? I asked Bell whether he knew. He said no. Then I told him about Lenora and Calder. There was another long silence. Finally, Bell said, don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. Good. Where are you? At the committee's office. Can I come? Yes. I drove there immediately. The committee was operating from a temporary office in a building downtown. Bell met me in the lobby. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him. More tired. More worried. We went upstairs. 3 people were waiting in a conference room. One was a financial investigator. One was an accountant. The third was a woman I'd never met. Bell introduced her as Miriam Harker, Everett Harker's younger sister. I had no idea he had a sister. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, you look like your father. I didn't know how to respond. Did you know him? Yes. Did he work with Silas? Yes. Did he trust Silas? She looked at Bell, then back at me. More than he trusted Everett. That answer made everyone uncomfortable. Miriam sat down. The company has been fighting over this for 21 years. Why? Because Silas believed Everett would eventually sell Harker Ridge. Was he wrong? No. She slid a document across the table. Everett has been preparing for a sale for years. I looked at the document. There were acquisition discussions, potential buyers, asset valuations. The dates went back nearly a decade. Then I saw something. The sale documents weren't simply for Harker Ridge. They included the Northvale assets. So whoever buys the company gets the reserve. Potentially. And my father's agreement prevents that. Unless it's resolved. How? Miriam looked at Bell. Bell answered. By paying the beneficiaries. I looked at him. How much? We don't know. Why not? Because the agreement requires an independent valuation. And the company doesn't want that. Correct. I finally understood why the restructuring had suddenly become so important. The company was trying to separate its divisions and sell pieces of the business before anyone could force a complete accounting. But I still didn't understand my role. Why me? Miriam leaned forward. Because your father is the only original beneficiary who has a living child currently employed by Harker Ridge. I stared at her. That's it? No. What else? She looked at Bell. He slid another document across the table. It was the Employee Protection Agreement. My name wasn't printed anywhere. My father's was. But beside his name was a handwritten amendment. Beneficiary, Corwin Hale. Date, March 17, 2008. My joining date. I looked at Bell. I never signed this. You didn't have to. Who did? He turned the document around. At the bottom was a signature. I recognized it. My father's. He had amended the agreement 3 months before he died. I couldn't breathe. He knew I'd join Harker Ridge. Miriam shook her head. Not exactly. Then why? He knew someone from his family might eventually return. I looked at the date. March 17, 2008. I had signed my employment application that same week. But there was something else. A small handwritten note underneath the amendment. I leaned closer. It said, only if he chooses to stay. I looked up. What does that mean? Nobody answered. Then Bell said something that finally connected the bonus to everything else. The company didn't pay you to stay for 90 days. He pointed at the agreement. They paid you because after 90 days, you would legally qualify as an active employee beneficiary. I stared at him. And if I quit before then? You would lose that status. My mouth went dry. That's why the bonus. Yes, the company wanted me to stay. Correct. But why would they want me to qualify? Bell looked at me. They didn't. I understood. Someone else did. The board had paid me enough money to make staying seem like a gift. But the real purpose was to prevent the company from dismissing me or forcing me out before the 90-day deadline. I asked the question that had been bothering me since the beginning. Who approved my bonus? Bell looked at Miriam. Miriam answered. Celeste. I frowned. Then why would Celeste help me? Because she may not be trying to help you. The room went quiet. Bell opened another file. Inside was a corporate resolution dated 90 days before my bonus. The document authorized the restructuring. But one paragraph had been added later. I read it. Then I read it again. It said that any employee who became an active beneficiary during the restructuring period would be entitled to request an independent review before any qualifying assets could be transferred. I looked at Bell. So they needed me here. Yes. Why? Because someone wanted you to stop the sale. I thought of the phone call. Stop looking at Northvale. I thought of Lenora. He deserves to know. I thought of Calder. Corwin has to make the decision before they do. Suddenly, the entire situation looked different. There were two groups inside Harker Ridge. One wanted the sale completed. Another wanted the reserve investigated. And both groups were using me. Bell reached into the folder and pulled out one final document. This arrived this morning. He placed it in front of me. It was a notice from the board. The 90-day period ended tomorrow. And at 9 a.m. the next morning, Harker Ridge was scheduled to vote on the sale of its largest division. At the bottom of the notice was a handwritten message. Not from the board. Not from Bell. The handwriting was my father's. I recognized it immediately. It said, "Corwin, if you are reading this, don't choose the money. Choose the truth." I read my father's words 3 times. "Corwin, if you are reading this, don't choose the money. Choose the truth." For several seconds, nobody in the room spoke. Then I looked at Bell. "Where did you get this?" He didn't answer immediately. "Where did you get it?" "It was attached to the original agreement." "Why haven't I seen it before?" "Because we only found it this morning." I looked at the handwriting again. There was no doubt. It was my father's. But the message raised more questions than it answered. "What money?" Bell sat across from me. "The compensation you're entitled to." "How much?" "We don't know yet." "Give me a number." He hesitated. "Based on the current valuation, your portion could be between $4 and $7 million. I stared at him. Miriam looked uncomfortable. "That's an estimate. 4 to 7 million? Potentially." I leaned back. Suddenly, the $38,400 bonus felt almost ridiculous. All those years of worrying about mortgage payments, roof repairs, college expenses, and retirement suddenly looked very different. But my father's note had warned me not to choose the money. I asked Bell, "What happens if I choose the money?" "You accept the company's settlement. And then, the review ends. Northvale may remain undisclosed." "Meaning the sale goes through?" "Most likely." I looked at Miriam. "Why would my father tell me not to take the money?" She looked down at the table. "Because he believed the money wasn't the real issue." "What was?" "The people who controlled it." I stood. "I need to understand everything before tomorrow morning." Bell nodded. "There is one person who can explain the beginning." "Who?" "Everett Harker." I almost laughed. "He's going to tell me the truth?" "If anyone can, he can." "Why would he?" "Because he asked to meet you." I looked at him. "When?" "Tonight." The meeting took place at Everett Harker's private office. It wasn't at company headquarters. It was a quiet building in Paradise Valley, surrounded by trees and expensive homes. Everett was waiting alone. He looked older than his photographs. He was 71, but that evening he looked closer to 80. He stood when I entered. "Corwin." I shook his hand. "Mr. Harker." He smiled faintly. "Your father never called me that." "You knew him well?" "Well enough." We sat across from each other. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Everett said, "You have his notebook." I immediately looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because Warren never trusted computers." That sounded like my father. He kept everything on paper. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" Everett looked away. "Because I was ashamed." I wasn't expecting that. "Of what?" "Of what happened." I waited. He continued. "Your father discovered that Silas and I had created Northvale." "You created it?" "Yes." "Why?" "At first, to protect Harker Ridge." "From what?" "From ourselves." I frowned. He gave a tired smile. "That probably sounds ridiculous." "It does." It wasn't. He explained that in the late 1990s, Harker Ridge was growing faster than either brother could manage. They had contracts worth millions, but inconsistent cash flow. One major client could delay payment for 6 months. A fuel crisis could destroy a quarter's profits. A lawsuit could freeze millions. Silas believed the company needed a reserve outside the normal operating structure. Everett agreed. They created Northvale. The idea was simple. Certain profits would be placed there. The reserve would remain untouched unless the company faced a major financial crisis. For years, it worked, Everett said. Then what happened? Greed. He said the word without hesitation. Who became greedy? Everyone. He explained that once Northvale had accumulated enough money, people realized it could be used for things beyond protecting the company. Real estate purchases, acquisitions, private investments, political donations, consulting arrangements. Some legitimate, some questionable, some completely unnecessary. And my father discovered this. Yes. How? Your father noticed that invoices didn't match the work being performed. He found Northvale. He found the payments first. Why didn't you stop it? Everett looked at his hands. I tried. I stared at him. You expect me to believe that? No. Then tell me what really happened. Everett looked directly at me. Silas took control. Of Northvale. Of the reserve. And you let him? I didn't know the extent of it. Until my father told you. Yes. Then what? I confronted Silas. What happened? He told me the money belonged to Harker Ridge. Technically. That was his argument. And you disagreed. I told him the company couldn't operate with two sets of books. Everett paused. Your father agreed. I thought about the handwritten note. The company is not losing money. Someone is using the company to move it. Everett nodded. Warren wanted everything brought back into the official accounts. Why didn't you do that? Because Silas threatened to destroy the company. I stared at him. How? He had control over enough contracts to cripple us. That's impossible. It sounds impossible. He leaned forward. But back then, a few clients represented more than half our revenue. If those contracts disappeared, Harker Ridge would collapse. I understood. So you chose to protect the company. I chose badly. What did Silas do? He created a second agreement. The Employee Protection Agreement. Yes. Why? Because he knew eventually someone would expose the reserve. And he wanted to make sure it couldn't simply disappear. Everett explained that Silas had created the agreement to force a future accounting. If Harker Ridge ever sold the company or transferred major assets while the reserve remained unresolved, designated employees could demand an independent review. My father was one of them. But there was another clause. Your father could trigger the review himself. Then why didn't he? Everett looked at me. Because Silas gave him a choice. What choice? Money or truth? I felt my stomach tighten. What did Silas offer him? Enough money to leave quietly. How much? $300,000. In 2005, that was a fortune. And my father refused? Yes. Then why didn't he expose you? Everett looked down. Because Silas told him something. What? That if Warren went public, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. I thought about my father's personality. That sounded exactly like the kind of argument that would stop him. He believed him. Yes. So he left. Yes. Without taking the money. Yes. I looked at Everett. And then he added me to the agreement. Yes. Why? He wanted the next generation to have the choice he didn't. I sat silently. Everett continued. Your father didn't trust me. He didn't trust Silas. But he believed that someday the company would reach a point where the truth could come out without destroying everyone who depended on it. I remembered the note. Only if he chooses to stay. I finally understood. My father hadn't predicted that I would work for Harker Ridge. He had simply left me the right to choose if I ever did. Why did the company give me the bonus? Everett looked away. Because Celeste found the agreement. She knew. Yes. And she wanted me to stay. Not exactly. What does that mean? Celeste wants the sale completed. Then why keep me? Because she needed to know whether you would activate the agreement. I frowned. So she was waiting to see what I'd do. Yes. Then why pay me? Because if she terminated you before the 90 days, you could claim she interfered with the agreement. I understood. The bonus made it look voluntary. Correct. I sat back. Who called me? Everett didn't answer. Was it you? No. Celeste? No. Calder. He hesitated. Possibly. Why would Calder care? Everett looked at me. Because Calder has been managing the reserve for 21 years. I already knew that. What I don't understand is why he's still protecting it. Everett sighed. Because he believes Silas's original plan was right. Protecting the company. Yes. Even now. Especially now. I thought about Lenora. Then why was Lenora helping him? Because she believes her father is protecting the employees. And is he? Everett's expression changed. That depends on what you call protection. He stood and walked to a cabinet. He removed an old folder. This is the part your father never knew. He placed it on the table. Inside were financial statements from Northvale. I scanned them. The reserve was enormous. Hundreds of millions. But then I saw something that made me stop. There were regular withdrawals. Not from Harker Ridge. From Northvale. The money had been moving out for years. I looked at Everett. Where did it go? That's the question. Didn't you investigate? I tried. Who stopped you? He looked at me. Calder. I felt my stomach drop. Why? Because after Silas died, Calder believed he was the only person left who understood Silas's instructions. Did Silas leave instructions? Yes. About the reserve? About who should control it. I turned the page. There was a handwritten instruction. If the company is ever divided, the reserve must not be controlled by any single Harker. I looked up. So Calder took control. Temporarily. 21 years is a long temporary period. Everett nodded. He was supposed to transfer control when the conditions were met. What conditions? An independent beneficiary had to request an audit. I understood. Me? Yes. The room went silent. Everett looked at me. That's why everyone has been waiting for you. Everyone. Celeste wants the sale. Calder wants the reserve protected. And you. He looked exhausted. I want the company to survive. I stood. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They are now. Why? Because the reserve is no longer intact. I stared at him. What do you mean? Someone has been taking money out. How much? Enough that the reserve may not cover the beneficiaries. How much is missing? Everett's voice dropped. Approximately $120 million. I couldn't speak. Then I remembered the folder. The payments. The foundation. The companies. And suddenly the mystery changed again. This wasn't simply about money hidden 20 years ago. Someone had been moving money out of the reserve for years. And whoever did it had access to the structure created by Silas. I asked Everett the question that mattered most. Who has access? He looked at me. 3 people. Who? Me. Calder. And? He hesitated. Your supervisor. I felt my chest tighten. Lenora. Everett nodded. Her father gave her access 3 years ago. I thought about her walking into my office. I thought about her saying she didn't want to lose her job. I thought about her warning me. Then I remembered something else. The bonus. $38,400. The number in my father's notebook. Maybe the bonus wasn't the clue. Maybe it was the bait. I left Everett's office just before midnight. When I got home, Mara was waiting in the kitchen. She looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. How bad? I sat down. $120 million. She stared at me. What? Potentially missing. From where? A company reserve. She was quiet. Then she asked, and you're involved? I think everyone wants me involved. Why? Because my father left me the right to demand an audit. She sat across from me. What are you going to do? I thought about the money. $4 to $7 million. A settlement that could change our lives. Then I thought about my father's final message. Don't choose the money. Choose the truth. I don't know yet. At 2:13 in the morning, my phone buzzed. An email. No sender name. One attachment. I opened it. It was a bank statement from Northvale. One transfer was highlighted. $38,400. The transfer had been made 3 months earlier. To my own bank account. I stared at the screen. The money I thought had come from Harker Ridge hadn't come from Harker Ridge at all. It had come from the hidden reserve. And the transaction description contained only 4 words. Beneficiary activation payment. I immediately called Bell. He answered. I know. You knew? Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because we needed you to discover it yourself. Why? Because if you knew before the 90 days ended, the agreement could have been challenged. I stared at the transfer. Then I noticed the authorization code. It had been approved by someone with access to the reserve. I knew the name. Lenora Voss. But the timestamp was even stranger. The payment had been authorized from a computer inside my own office. At a time when I had been home with Mara. I looked at the screen again. Someone had used my employee credentials. And whoever did it wanted me to believe I had already accepted the money. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Celeste. I didn't call Lenora. I called Belle. You said the agreement could be challenged if I knew about the payment before the 90 days ended. Yes. Then someone made the payment through my credentials without telling me. That's what it appears. Who? I don't know. I looked again at the transaction. Lenora Voss. My employee credentials. My office computer. 3 things that shouldn't have belonged together. Then I noticed the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. That was the time the payment had supposedly been authorized. But I had been home. My office computer should have been locked. I told Bell. He went quiet. Then he said, don't touch the computer. Why? Because we may need to prove the access wasn't yours. I drove to work before sunrise. The building was almost empty. I went directly to my office. My computer was still there. I didn't turn it on. Instead, I called the company's IT security department and reported that someone may have accessed my account. Within 20 minutes, 2 technicians arrived. One of them was a man named Rowan Pike, someone I had worked with for years. He checked the system logs. Then he frowned. What? He looked at me. Your credentials were used. I know. But your computer wasn't. I stared at him. What? The transaction wasn't initiated from this machine. Then where? He pulled up the access record. The authorization came from an administrative terminal. Where? He hesitated. Corporate headquarters. I felt a strange relief. At least I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had used my credentials from another location. Can you tell who logged in? Not yet. Can you tell what device? Yes. He showed me the identifier. I recognized it. That's the CFO's terminal. Rowan looked at me. Are you sure? I've seen it before. He nodded. Then he said something that made me realize how deep the deception went. The terminal was accessed using your employee credentials. Who was physically sitting there? We don't know. Check the building cameras. We already did. He pulled up the footage. The time was 2:13 a.m. The corporate office was dark. Most lights were off. A single person entered the restricted accounting area. The face wasn't visible. The person was wearing a dark jacket. But there was something distinctive. A slight limp. I knew that walk. Calder Voss. I stared at the screen. That's him. Rowan looked at me. You know him? Yes. Bell arrived 20 minutes later. I showed him the footage. He didn't look surprised. Calder. Yes. Then we have our answer. No. He looked at me. We don't. Why not? Because Calder didn't have access to your credentials. I understood. Someone had given him the information. Lenora. Possibly. But why would they transfer my bonus from the reserve? Bell sat down. Because they needed to establish that you had already received your beneficiary payment. Why? So you could be excluded from the audit. I stared at him. But the payment was legitimate. Yes. Then why would it exclude me? Because the original agreement contains a clause preventing a beneficiary from demanding an independent review after accepting a settlement. I felt sick. So someone tried to trick me into accepting the money. Exactly. But I never signed anything. That's why the transfer was so important. I finally understood. The $38,400 wasn't merely a bonus. It was an attempt to create a paper trail suggesting I had accepted compensation. If I had never questioned the payment, the company could later argue that I had already been paid and had no standing to challenge the sale. The strange bonus had been designed to look generous. But it was actually a legal trap. I asked Bell who had created it. He shook his head. That's what we still need to prove. Then his phone rang. He answered. His expression changed. Where? He listened. Don't move anything. He ended the call. What? The board meeting. What about it? The vote has been postponed. Why? Someone leaked the Northvale records. I felt a strange relief. Who? We don't know. Then Bell looked at me. But the leak came with a message. What message? He showed me the email. It contained only one sentence. The beneficiary has chosen. I stared at it. My father's words came back to me. Choose the truth. I suddenly realized something. The person who leaked the records wasn't trying to stop the investigation. They were forcing it into the open. Where's Calder? Bell looked at me. We don't know. Lenora. Missing. I immediately called her. No answer. Then I called her father. Nothing. We spent the next several hours reconstructing the Northvale transactions. The independent investigators found something unexpected. The missing $120 million hadn't gone to one person. It had been divided into dozens of investments over 15 years. Real estate, private companies, equipment financing, energy projects, small businesses. Most of them looked completely legitimate. That was the genius of the structure. The money wasn't sitting in an account waiting to be stolen. It had been converted into assets. And most of those assets had increased in value. The reserve hadn't disappeared. It had been transformed. The problem was ownership. Who owned those assets? That question eventually led us back to the Vale Foundation. And that's where the final surprise came. Elias Vale didn't exist. Not as a real person. He had died in 1999. The name had been used as a legal identity for the foundation's trustee structure. The actual controlling trustee was not Calder. It was Silas Harker. Or rather, his estate. Silas had created the structure before his death, so neither Everett nor Celeste could control the reserve. Calder had only been acting as administrator. And someone else had been quietly managing the investments. We found that person the next morning. Merritt Sloan, the retired records supervisor. I couldn't believe it. The woman who had told me to look at the 2004 records had been involved the entire time. We located her in New Mexico. She agreed to speak with us. She didn't deny anything. I knew someone would eventually come looking, she said. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know whether you were really Warren's son. I am. That's not what I mean. She looked at me. Your father had a weakness. What weakness? He cared more about people than money. I almost smiled. That wasn't a weakness. It was when powerful people learned how to use it. She explained everything. After my father discovered the Northvale structure, Silas asked Merritt to help maintain the records. When my father refused the settlement, Silas created the Employee Protection Agreement. But after Silas died, the company became divided. Everett wanted to close Northvale. Calder wanted to preserve it. Celeste wanted to sell the company. And Merritt quietly continued managing the investments. Why? Because Silas's instructions were clear. What were they? Don't let the reserve become personal wealth. Then what was it supposed to be? A safety net for the employees who had built the company. I stared at her. So all of this was supposed to protect people. Then why hide it? Because once you put that much money into a normal corporate account, it becomes vulnerable. She explained that the reserve had funded employee benefits, emergency assistance, retirement supplements, and investments designed to generate income for former employees. But over the years, the system had become so complicated that even the people inside Harker Ridge no longer understood it. Then Celeste decided to sell the company. That triggered the old agreement. And that brought me into the picture. I asked the question that had bothered me most. Why did my father put my name on the agreement? Merritt smiled sadly. Because he knew you. He knew I would work here? No. Then why? He knew you would ask questions. That answer hit harder than I expected. My father hadn't chosen me because he thought I'd become rich. He had chosen me because he believed I wouldn't ignore something simply because ignoring it was easier. Then I asked about Lenora. Merritt's expression changed. She made the transfer. Why? She thought she was protecting her father. What did Calder want? To stop Celeste from selling the company before the reserve was properly accounted for. So he wasn't stealing. No. What about the $120 million? Still there. All of it. Most of it. Where? Working. The final valuation showed that the assets were worth significantly more than the original reserve. The $120 million that everyone thought was missing had grown to nearly $190 million. There was no secret fortune belonging to Calder. No hidden millionaire. No stolen inheritance. There had been something much more complicated. A group of people had spent 2 decades protecting a financial structure that was never designed to enrich one person. But they had done it through secrecy. And secrecy had created the very suspicion they were trying to avoid. The independent audit took 4 months. Harker Ridge eventually abandoned the proposed sale. Celeste remained CEO, but the board created a separate employee trust to oversee the reserve. Calder resigned. Lenora returned to the company 6 months later after cooperating fully with the investigation. She apologized to me personally. I thought I was helping my father. I know. You were never supposed to find the transaction. I figured. She looked embarrassed. I should have told you. Yes. She nodded. I was scared. So was I. That was all I said. As for the $38,400, the company allowed me to keep it. Not because it was a secret payment. Not because I had been tricked. The audit confirmed that it was a legitimate employee payment, but the money had originally been transferred through the reserve as part of the beneficiary activation process. I eventually put most of it into our mortgage. Mara insisted we keep some for the trip we'd been postponing for years. We finally took that trip. But the biggest change wasn't financial. It was the way I looked at my father. For years, I'd thought he had simply left Harker Ridge because he was angry. I had imagined him as a stubborn man who couldn't stand corporate politics. I was wrong. He had walked away because he couldn't accept a choice between protecting people and telling the truth. And when he couldn't solve the problem himself, he left the decision for me. Not the money. The choice. A year after the investigation ended, I visited the old maintenance yard. The building had been renovated. The shelves were gone. The boxes were gone. The old records had been digitized and placed in a secure archive. I stood outside for a while, remembering the night I'd hidden behind those shelves while Calder searched for the same folder. Then I opened my phone. I still had the photograph of my father's final note. Choose the truth. I finally understood why he had written it. Truth wasn't always the easiest choice. It didn't always make you richer. It didn't always make people like you. Sometimes it cost you opportunities. Sometimes it cost you relationships. And sometimes it forced you to discover that the people you thought were villains were actually trying to solve a problem in the wrong way. But eventually, the truth had one advantage money never had. You could build something on it. I never became the millionaire everyone expected me to become. I didn't quit Harker Ridge either. I stayed. Not because they paid me. Not because of the bonus. And definitely not because I trusted the company blindly. I stayed because after 18 years, I finally understood what my father had been trying to tell me. A workplace isn't just a building. It's the decisions people make when they think nobody is watching. And sometimes the most important thing you can inherit from your parents isn't money. It's the courage to question what everyone else has decided to accept. The strange part is that I still have the original $38,400 payroll statement. I keep it in a folder with my father's notebook. Every once in a while, I look at it. At first, I thought it was the biggest financial surprise of my life. Now I see it differently. It wasn't really a bonus. It was the beginning of a question. And the answer ended up changing everything I thought I knew about my father, my employer, and myself. If you were in my position, knowing you could receive several $1,000,000 by quietly accepting the company's settlement, but demanding the truth could put your career and your family's future at risk, would you choose the money or insist on finding out what really happened?